And with this sword Excalibur, Arthur, you shall become. Oh shit! Wrong story. And with this heron-marked blade.
It's almost as if I was in the same story. And with that, welcome to this month's episode of the 800s. That's right. It is the beginning of Big Book Summer, baby. I am your host, Alex, and you just heard from my epic co-host, Adam. And as always, a shout out to the man behind the scenes, Elaine, making it happen. All right, with that, why don't we just get right into our plugs, because I'm excited to talk about this here book.
Yeah, sure thing. If you joined us for our pre-show, you heard some music. That was Fearless First by Incompetech. If you would like to check out other scores available from Incompetech, head over to filmmusic.io. There you can find scores from multiple artists as well as Incompetech. If you'd like to know more about what we do here at DM's Table, head over to dmstable.com. There you'll find out all sorts of tidbits about us, who we are, and what we do, as well as all of the links I'm about to mention. We have a YouTube channel. You can go ahead and check the link out below your video here for our YouTube channel. There we post all of our videos that we create as creators, as well as, these videos. If you would like a free subscription to Audible, head over to dmstable.com/audible and let us get a piece of that pie. Audible will give you 1 month free and some other goodies for joining up. And it's a great way to experience it's a great way for a new experience for books. If you would like to monetarily show your appreciation, might I suggest you head over to dmstable.com/Etsy for our Etsy page. We also have Patreon, which is linked below your video here, where you can join us for a low subscription price of $2 a month. And finally, let's talk socials. We have Facebook and X. We are at the DM's Table on Facebook and at DM's Table on X. And if you'd like to get even more intimate, you can hit us up on our socials for our Discord server link, where we talk all things nerdy, not just books. But enough about that. Let's talk about this book. What are we talking about?
All right, so this month on the 800s, we'll be discussing The Eye of the World by Robert Jordon, the first book of his epic fantasy series, Wheel of Time. The world is changing. The Dark One's influence is spreading. No longer the legends of the borderlands, evil encroaches even on the rural farmers and woodland folk of the two rivers. Meanwhile, the Wheel of Time turns, weaving the patterns of fate, tugged by the mortals and Dark One alike. 3 men are at the center of it all, surrounded by legends and friends. One in all. What parts are they to play? No one truly knows, but there may be answers in the mysterious Tar Valon, home of the Aes Sedai, or perhaps even the Eye of the World itself.
Hey-oh! Gotta throw in a title piece.
It's almost as if you've discovered my pattern.
If this is your first time joining us tonight, let me be the first to say welcome. This is how our show operates. Essentially, we are a discussion show. Alex or myself will pose a topic or question for discussion about the book. Where those topic and questions come from are Alex, myself, or Chit. So if you have anything you would like to chit-chat about, feel free to throw it into chat at any time. And when we get a pause in the conversation, we'll scope out the chat for topics or questions. Now, after we pose a question, Alex and I will give you guys our thoughts on the question or topic to give you guys the opportunity to type up your reply in chat. And then we'll take a look at chat and see what kind of interesting tidbits you all have to say about the topic at hand. That's pretty much it.
But a quick disclaimer, this is a show geared towards adults. We cover adult topics and themes and stuff, and while we try not to swear too much, it does happen, so bring kids around at your own discretion. Also, we're trying to create a fun and supportive community over here at DM's Table where people can feel free to nerd out and be passionate about all the things that they love without any fear of judgment or teasing or anything like that. So in some, be nice or fuck off.
Oh, I thought you were gonna go medieval on us there for a second, but
Ye fucketh offeth? I don't know.
all right, enough of that time foolery. Let's talk books. What were
All
your
right.
first impressions of
The first ones.
I?
Honestly, this book hits you in the face so hard right from the beginning with just like they might as well have a giant stamp that says lore. I had to re-listen I ended up actually like reading the physical book, but like when I initially listened to it, and I had to listen to the first, like the epilogue in the first chapter, like 4 times to feel like I got everything out of it. It was, it was so dense. Like we're talking, we are talking like Tolkien levels of like density of lore, like right from the get go. It's got that similar. It gave me that similar feel of like the epic that happened ages ago. Zoom, we're right into like we're in the middle of the farmlands dealing with the people who know nothing about the outside world. So like immediately evokes high fantasy. It has a lot of stuff you want to dig into and dig through, but there's no way to keep track of it all unless you're literally taking notes the whole way through. So you just, I finally figured out I've just got to buckle up and ride the wave, What about you, Adam?
Yeah, the preface really gets you going there. It's like, what the fuck is going on? Who are these guys? What is this? It's a classic way to start a fantasy tale, and I'm glad Robert Jordan decided to go with that. It was very exciting and made you want to know more about the world. But as soon as we jumped to Rand, the first thing, gosh, that just jumped out of my head is this guy's pimping out his dad. He's all like, yeah, he's a widow, but he's a hot widow. He
Like,
gets
damn,
the
dude,
looks.
just chill. Just chill a little bit.
It was funny. Yeah, it was very exciting, and lore dump and all that really made you wonder, like, who the fuck controls this world? What year is it? All the classics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Via Drake. What's that ghost? Crazy dude, just wandering into town talking about my smoking hot dad, and what's that? Oh my gosh! So anyway, there's this girl I like.
who I also totally don't like. Oh my god. Yeah, pretty prototypical. Like there's a love interest that like they're like that that's the person that they think they like, that eventually is not going to be the person that they were focused on. The pretty standard thing that I've come to see. Like I predicted that even before the whole epic fantasy thing happened. Didn't turn out the way exactly that I thought it would, but
V.S. Drake would like to chit chat about prose. I think that's a good place to start too.
All right. All right. I'll get us started off on this one. I thought the prose was pretty accessible. I think that is for being as lore heavy as it is. The actual prose itself is a lot more accessible than Lord of the Rings tends to be. probably a bit of a function of the fact that it was written some 50 years later. But I thought it was a little. It can be a bit jarring at first, especially if you're not used to high fantasy, because you get pretty accessible prose and like a familiarity with it that is, yeah, a la Sanderson. But it also has these really complex naming schemes, and there's very little, especially having read the physical book as well, there's very little explanation for why things are the way that they are, but as you read the book, it does seem to fit together and you get used to it. But it is pretty jarring to be like, this is how we normally talk, and then the Aes Sedai and Tarvalon. So it is a bit of a juxtaposition from like an onomatopoeic standpoint, so not to use too many big weird words, but yeah. What about you? What do you think of the prose, Adam?
Yeah, there's I think two takes on prose, and obviously a spectrum of choices in between. But I think the two main targets you get with prose is an author who wants it to be 1000% immersive and like this is exactly how it would be like if you were in this fantasy setting. And then you get the authors who are like, I understand that people would talk a certain way in my setting. There would be certain things that people would converse about, and there'd be a certain dialect form for each little area. But I'm going to dial that back to make it more readable for my reader. And I think a lot of high-end review critics favor the more flowery, accurate prose, where I personally want a book to be more enjoyable and approachable. I think Robert Jordon does a really good job of adapting an approachable style to something that has its own flavor.
Excellently put. I definitely agree with that assessment. And Viet Strike says that he thinks that Robert Jordon focused on detail, but is willing to move the story along as needed. And yeah, I do also like that via Strike, that the language and the idioms and the curses all feel like a part of the world. I think we've talked about that before, is that there's something about an author that can master the curse words of their language in a way that doesn't feel like hackneyed or over the top, unless the world itself is over the top, and this and all of this, like, and all of their language seemed to fit the lore as it went on, and you kind of come to appreciate it as you go on, and it adds to the world building, which I think truly great prose can do, is that it can be a part of the world building itself, is showing your readers how these people talk and that there's a reason for the way that they talk the way that they do. Like, I think a great example of this is the difference between, say, how like Rand and Matt and Perrin talk compared to, say, Loyal, like the Ogier. Like his language is more flowery and flowy, and that kind of fits with, a species that is incredibly ancient and incredibly attuned to the forest and trees and stone and things, compared to people who are just like, we're the blokes from down the block.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean too, is like Jordon definitely added in affectations to specific people to make it more immersive of an experience, but he didn't like throw it in your face. Like a good example that comes to mind is the Name of the Wind. There's a scene where the main character runs into, as he puts it, a country bumpkin, and the whole thing is just like slaughtered English and terrible phrasing and incomprehensible words. And like for that, it was okay because it was only for one chapter. Um, and I think Jordan does a good job of towing that line of keeping it immersive but not making you suffer through it.
Yeah, and I agree that like it can make sense to have people like that in a story where it is language that is barely like understandable, because that exists in the world, in like our world, let alone a fantasy one. But you have to like, there has to be something behind it. There has to be some substance behind it. You can't just be like, oh look, Hillbilly Joe, and then make him talk like and give no other context for it. Whereas Robert Jordan does a good job of saying like, oh, these people are like, this is their history, this is like what their city says about them, what their town says about them, and then you hear their voice and you're like, oh, that fits, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it doesn't take you out, it doesn't take, like you said, it's immersive, it doesn't take you out of the story to be like, man, this dude talks weird.
I think your example of the Ogier was really good. Like that's a good example of intentionally making a character sound different without slapping it in your face and being like, oh, I can barely get through these chapters.
All right, so we've talked a bit about prose. Oh well, VS Drake. I like that you're on it, VS Drake. We'll go with that question. What did you think about the themes for the book? What were they, and what ones stood out to you, and how do you think they were executed?
Feels like an essay question. For me, there are a couple of themes that stand out. Obviously, we have some internal ones with Rand. Well, honestly, everybody had some sort of internal theme going on. But I want to talk about Rand's internal conflict, where he warred within himself about potentially not actually being his father's son, and that maybe he's actually adopted, or maybe he just met his dad, just met his mom with him already, and all that stuff. I really liked that internal conflict that he had and how he worked through it through the book, and in the end came to the conclusion of, it doesn't matter. It's more about me. It's not about other people.
Mm-hmm.
That theme really spoke to me, and I'll leave it at that. What theme you got?
Well, I mean, this might be a little on the nose, but I think, and I think this is a theme that probably, based on what I know about, I may have read the next two books, that runs throughout this, but you can kind of get it even from the first book, is the cyclical nature of history. Is that history comes in cycles and it's very easy to forget, but it is important to remember history because it informs where we can go next and how we can influence our own fates. We see a little bit of this in, again, I keep using Loyal as a good example, but the Ogier are seen as this like, mythical species that had faded into history, and like we're going from like that farmer's view of like everything's legend, Trollocs, the Dark One, half men, and all the, and Aes Sedai, and how when we isolate ourselves from history, things become way scarier and they feel overwhelming, and it can make you feel helpless, whereas when you have access to the history of the world, the things that you are concerned about shift drastically. Like if you look at like Rand versus Loyal when they first meet, he's just like, "Oh, that's nothing. I've like that place isn't something to be scared of. Like it's just where my kinfolk decided that like, hey, we wanted some permanent greenery here or whatever, like the steadfast or whatever, like they you also see that even with the Aes Sedai is kind of like that middle ground between the two is like the knowledge of history affects how each of them reacts to the things in their world. And it's very easy to think you have all the answers and be unafraid of things like Moiraine and the Aes Sedai kind of do, versus one who has even more of that background and has almost lost the present as opposed to the past, and how they all it all comes to a head in the same spot, literally, like it's on the nose or on the eye of the world rather.
On the eye.
Yeah, it's right on the eye. That they all converge, but they all have this very different perspective that leads them there. One is fear, one is fate, and the other is a desire to learn. And like it all comes to a head, but like had they not all been a part of it, had they not had all that context that they did from all three different perspectives, they would not have been able to face what they did. And it is a theme that kind of pops up, is that it is important to be students of history without being ignorant to the goings on of the world as they are now. And that pops up pretty regularly. That and your very typical like good versus evil, but they also have to be in balance kind of thing,
Yeah.
Like that theme is like as high fantasy as it gets. There's very clearly good, there's very clearly evil, but in some way they both have to exist, for one cannot without the other type of thing.
Yeah. B.S. Drake mentioned the theme. You can't trust anyone in dark times. That was definitely a well-versed theme throughout this book. How many times did a stranger go on and fuck them over? But then again, they had the opposite. They had some strangers that were nice to them and let them do random ass jobs. But those strangers usually didn't trust them.
Well, I think I agree that like I think it was a theme that like you have to be wary of people in dark times, but I think for me the theme that stuck out even more was it's okay to be cautious in dark times, but it doesn't have to prevent you from being a good person. Like that farmer that Matt and Rand stay with, who's just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't want to know what's going on, but you're welcome to stay if you want. Just don't tell anybody. Like I really liked that subtle message of like you don't have to be a bad person just because you're scared. Message.
Like, yeah, there was that one guy that gave him a ride too.
Yeah.
When they found out about the bounty,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, "You're probably wondering if I'm going to turn you in for the bounty, but f those guys."
Yeah. And
I thought it was
also,
good.
and like to go off of that, like it is possible to go too far in the other direction, like we see with the White Cloaks. Where you believe so blindly in the fact that you're doing good that you are willing to trample over good people for your goal. And that doesn't, so again, it's that balance between even in the dark, there needs to be light, and even in the light, there needs to be skepticism and doubt, like.
Yeah. let's talk characters. Who'd you
Okay.
like? Who didn't you like? Who wasn't fleshed out enough? Who was well-rounded? Characters.
Wow, this is a big topic. Because there were a lot of characters.
And all I typed were characters.
um, so there were some. I think there were some characters that unfortunately fell a bit into the trap of being. Um, they weren't the most well-rounded because they were tropes. Um, my one of my bigger issues was with Moiraine personally. Um, she was a bit too much of the like all-knowing, all-seeing magical person, like again, like essentially a Gandalf, but she was a dick about it. Like,
she was a dick about it.
But the problem is like it's really hard to there's a logical consistency behind her, and I get she's a very logical person, but I don't know. I had trouble like caring about her as a character any more so than she was the powerful protector of the other protagonists. You know, because she'd just swoop in with her magic or whatever and be like, I can provide for you and I can find you so that even though you're separated, you can come back together. She was a function of the story. She wasn't a character to me for most of it. Because she was a little too detached for me to care, which was a bit rough sometimes, especially when she would be like, anybody with a thinking mind could see that you shouldn't trust somebody. And I'm like, dude, you grew up with access to insane amounts of knowledge, and you're talking about people who grew up where there was maybe half a dozen books in the entire village. Give them a fucking break. And you don't explain anything? Come on.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would definitely agree about Maureen. Like she definitely to me seemed like she needed a little more depth
Mm-hmm.
of character.
Yeah, because at least with like a Gandalf character, you get the like, oh, this is a guy who cares about the small folk of the world, like inherently. Whereas her whole thing is like, I care about the weaving of the wheel of time in history. I get that, but it all felt a little too lofty for her without any real personal connection, you know? It is pseudo plot armor. I agree, V.S. Drake, and I do agree that's the point of her. I just think she was one of the least fleshed out of like the main characters, because like you want to talk about the exact opposite, in my opinion. And I keep using him as an example, but Loyal is a great character who came in late in the book, had a purpose of being he is the vehicle for lore. He is the lore master in this, but he was a character that we got to know personally. We got to know that he was a little hot-headed for his species. We got to know that that's why he was out in the world when most of them weren't. You know, it gave a reason for him to be like that in a way that seemed either relatable or that was more than just a trope. You know, there was something more to him, even though he very much was a trope. He was the vehicle for the lore questions that everybody has. That was his thing. You know,
I'm
so
old, I know things.
I am old and of an old species who taught all this stuff, but at the same time, I'm also young and brazen. um, yeah,
Aes Sedai, yeah.
Yeah, the Aes Sedai is weird. Like that's another thing. If you don't read the book, you're never gonna get the spellings. They're it's the Aes Sedai is Aesedia. Oh, sorry, Dai.
I heard it.
Um,
I couldn't stop hearing it ever since I heard it in my head like this the first time, but I heard it as I sad I.
Well, it is two words. It's like AESSEDAI. So like it's eyes.
And I was like, "Eye of the world, I said I."
I'm not sure what you mean though. By what part is supposed to be secret of VS Drake? If you can let us know in the chat. So, getting around though to other characters, it was interesting, kind of having. It was interesting having three kind of main protagonists, and then two who might like. There was a cluster of protagoni. Uh, and it was kind of
characters.
Yep. It was kind of interesting having a cluster of them, and I thought for the most part they were pretty well rounded into characters that like made sense for their personalities, made sense, and they also made sense why they had the kinds of powers that they did, and it kind of suited them, which I thought was kind of nice. Like Perrin, for example, honestly, of the protagonists, probably my personal favorite. I liked that he was big and soft spoken. We got to find out that he stepped lightly because he was afraid of hurting others, and that was something that kind of played out really well in how he interacted with everybody, how he interacted with situations, why he worked better, why he struggled to be a leader among humans, but did pretty well as a leader of a wolf pack, is because there was like an instinct to him into the way that he moved, but also decent thought to it as well. And he was okay with holding back in favor of making a better decision. And I thought he was really well fleshed out, loved him as a character, great balance of flaws with enough like personal character growth to feel earned. Like I thought arguably the best done of all of them, and he's not even the main one by the end.
I gotta say, I was losing steam with this book, and then Perrin's Wolf chapters came along, and all of a sudden I was back in it, and I was like, "Oh fuck, this guy was boring as shit 2 chapters ago. What the hell?"
But it all made sense though when you get like to literally look through his eyes, his yellow eyes, and see why he is the way that he is, and everything else kind of clicks and makes sense. And I love when authors are able to do that with a character, is like take a character that had kind of been on the sidelines, move one piece into place, and it's like and you can just see it all unfold.
Yeah.
I mean,
so for me, I loved Rand, and Perrin. I think they were my 2 favorites. Rand, I loved his internal dialogues throughout all of his narrations.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jordan did a really good job showing Rand growing as he encountered more and more of the world, and maturing and understanding that, the further and further he went, the more he accepted that he was never going home again.
Mm-hmm.
And that it just wasn't in the cards, that he had more important things to him than going home. Even at the end, though, you still get that little bit of, I kind of want to just go home and say, fuck it. But,
yeah,
I think that's for other reasons. The character that stood out for me that I'm going to say disliked was Egwene.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of the story, we had a ton of potential for her. She and Rand have this little thing going on. She can use the one power. She has this adventurous spirit that is calling out to her to leave the two rivers and go explore. And then there's just kind of nothing.
Yeah, she's got that one track mind of like, I want to learn to use this power. But that's all there is to it.
Doesn't happen again the entire book.
Yeah. Honestly, I almost gave her as my example. The only reason why I said Moiraine is because we hear more from Moiraine than we do Egwene.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I will say this, there is hope for her yet. If you keep reading. Oh, the fling, are you talking about when she was with the travelers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. That was amusing, but I thought kind of undercut her character a little bit. But it also does kind of prove that, like, they're just fucking teenagers.
Yeah. I think, though, overall, I think Jordan took this book to focus on cementing the characters for future books.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely dragged out at times, but I think he did a really good job of saying, this person is this person, and this is what you can expect for me to build on. That's something that with a large cast kind of gets a little tiresome, and I definitely got a little tired through this book, but I don't regret it now that I'm done with the book. It definitely sets it up to feel like I care about these characters and want to learn what happens to them next.
Yeah. Also, a guy that I think like kind of flew a bit under the radar, at least on what we were talking about, but was a fun character to read was Tom. Fun character, just like he built a character that is truly a bard, a gleeman, like that feels that kind of lets you feel a little bit of the exuberance and joy that the characters are feeling in a way that feels grounded, which is weird considering that his whole thing is telling stories. But he's also like a practical person, which I thought was kind of fun, and it's going to be interesting to see how he plays a role because he may or may not be dead.
He can't be dead.
Obvious. Okay, what do you think of what V.S. Drake said? Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring retelling.
So in my opinion, The Eye of the World probably drew inspiration from a lot of classic tales. Mm-hmm. It's a very centered epic fantasy. If you couldn't tell from my joke about Excalibur, it's like there's definitely cuts to other things, but I think when you tell an epic fantasy, that's something that you should expect is somewhat call outs to other fantasy stories. There are tropes for a reason. There are things that work, and enough defending of the book. I agree. It sounded a lot like Fellowship of the Ring. Gave you very, very strong vibes of, there are these helpless children who need the help of a magic person and somebody who fights like a fucking psychopath, and other random characters that they all happen to know somehow. Like, if they only get to their destination, they'll be safe at last.
Yeah, it is very much a Rivendell. Like, I had the same thought, Rivendell analog with Tarvalon. like, we must get to the magical beings who live in the magical tower that's hidden in the woods many, many miles away. But
it's a fantasy trope to have
yeah.
a greatness thrust upon the unsuspecting.
Yeah, and
And
it
I
is a
think it's
vehicle for exploring the world too. Like that, I think was the big thing that it was very well done in a lot of parts, but it can get a bit mired in setup. Was the world building, like you said, Adam? It kind of got hard to get through sometimes. Is that we're like, I get you're building out the world, but I don't need 100 pages of a description of a city that is kind of like this other city, but it's like craggy stone instead of like hewn stone, that type of thing. Yeah, plot kind of lacked a little bit because this did feel almost like you said, Adam, a setup book. This is a book that was meant to make you feel about the characters. It was meant to make you give you a look at the world that they're working in and where it's coming from versus where it's going. But the plot is a bit lazy. Like, honestly, if you narrow this book down to the plot, it would be half, like the parts that had plot, it would be half the size at best.
I don't even know if you need half.
I said at best, and most of it is in the first 10 chapters and the last 10 chapters. So,
if we're talking about plot, we gotta talk about the eye and the climactic fight at the end.
Yeah. So, what were your thoughts on the eye?
Well. It's the title of the book, and we don't hear about it until 75% of the way through the book.
Yeah. I don't mind that it wasn't like brought up, but like until then necessarily. But I don't like that it was brought up, dropped again, and then brought up only at the very end, like because. What, they bring it up when they initially meet Loyal, maybe a little bit before that, and then they're just like,
I think Moraine mentions it in Two Rivers.
Oh, you're right. I almost forgot about that part. But that's the thing. I shouldn't forget about that part. You know, it's the eponymous piece of the story for the title. Like, it is something that is like the One Ring, where like it doesn't need to be brought up every 5 seconds, but I should never forget it's there. You know, when it's that big of a thing.
I felt like the Eye of the World, to throw it back to Lord of the Rings here, was kind of like going to the mountain to destroy the One Ring.
Without the finality of it?
Like it was like this thing that they all knew was a big, powerful thing that they would have to get to eventually. But first, let's go to Rivendell and make sure that we have a solid plan and all that, right? But then they instead stopped going to Rivendell and went straight to the volcano to dump the ring into the mountain.
Yes, right. They did also have the artifact that made you crazy.
The big thing that bothered me the most, and honestly was almost enough to make me go, I'm not picking up this book series again, is how unearned the ending fight was.
Yeah.
There was no nothing that any character had learned during this book was utilized in that final fight.
I absolutely agree. At the very end, that is a fight that shouldn't have happened when it did. You can have that fight in the book, be like, oh, this person tapped a well of power that they don't know how to control and beat somebody way bigger than they should have, because there is that element of powerful characters letting their guard down around somebody that they don't realize is as powerful as they are. That is something that you can play into, but it was given no ability to develop. And as you said, the most frustrating bit is that nothing that had been earned through the entirety of the book played any part in that right there, other than the idea that Rand is at the center of the current pattern that is being woven by the Wheel of Time. That is the only connection. It's barely there. Yeah, honestly, Land would have been way better to be the one to do any of that, because at the very least, he's a proficient fighter. We find out that he comes from this background of an entire kingdom that was based on creating these essentially like these legendary warriors that know the lore of the world. And even if Land had just participated and said something that triggered Rand, it might have felt more earned, but there's none of it.
What really drove me nuts though is like Jordan queued up potential for the characters to utilize the things they've picked up along the way.
Yep.
Starting when they came across the army and Lan was like, by the way, I'm secretly a fucking psychopathic war god. Like that men freaking praise me left and right about. Like, oh, okay. Have him lead a battle into these badlands and carve a path through the denizens of whatever the fuck the bad guys were called. Perrin could have showed up with his wolves and been like, "We must spirit away."
Yeah, there's a million different ways they could have done that. I agree. And there's like even if you had, let's say, Egwene and Nynaeve show up and like somehow trigger the power, because they're both learning to touch the one power and pull at those threads. You have Egwene trying, even half-heartedly. Nynaeve is afraid of it. You could have even had that as a character growth moment, have Nynaeve like overcome it and overcome that fear to help somebody, but like no, it's just kind of left on the table. And unfortunately it's falling into, in this book, it falls into that category of That's a good one, Via Straight. Thank you. We needed that. But it falls into this trope of we have the all-powerful Mary Sue, right here, who by no training or anything it has the ability to save the world, or at least save us for this book. And honestly, this book, by the end of it, because of that, and this is why I gave it the chance, kind of felt like somebody who was trying to write a Lord of the Rings style book where he knew there were going to be more books, but didn't realize how much he had set up by the end. And it was like, oh shit, I need a climactic fight. Let me throw it in at the end. And I was just like, I'm going to give you, because this is the first book, I'm going to give you the chance to flesh this out a bit. And, there's enough potential there. And if the world building hadn't been as good, and if the prose hadn't been as good as it was in a lot of these parts, and if I hadn't have learned to care about some of the characters, honestly, that last fight almost put me out too.
Yeah, I feel like too the predictability of the story is a little lacking too. Like, I'm pretty sure everybody and their mother knew Rand was the Dragon Reborn from page 2. The fact that the big bad evil guy that haunts their dreams was defeated in the end of the story, like he wasn't defeated. He's God. He wasn't defeated by Rand. Like, he's obviously gonna come back.
Yeah, it's yeah. There are too many predictable points where it felt like this almost felt like somebody tried to turn their notes about a whole like world and magic system and stuff into like
Yeah.
almost a this almost feels like a prequel book to the rest of the series where it's just like, oh shit, I want to tell this story, but I need to do all of this setup first, and by the time you get to the end of the setup you're like, oh shit, I need something epic. And like there, it feels like there was an editor in there who was just like, you need an epic fight somewhere.
I love that VS Jake brought up the Bella um energy buff that Rand gives her. Um,
Yeah.
especially because like the next chapter, Moraine's like talking to Egwene is all like, "Oh yeah, you remember like in a past you like had some mystical thing happen and then you were sick for like 3 days." Cut to Rand being sick for like 3 days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was not the. I will say the foreshadowing in this was not that subtle. Um, for all the other stuff that it does well, like, and yes, that does kind of scare me via Drake that the prequel is even more prequel feeling.
All right, I've shit on that enough.
Nah, I think
Good plot points for this book. Um, I really liked the beginning of the plot where the Two Rivers was attacked, and Moraine was like, "Oh yeah, they were obviously after you three, so like we've got to get out of Dodge." Like I feel like that part was solid. Like the motivation was there, the thematic, excuse me, thematic tropey lore was on point, and I loved all of those moments where characters had to think about how they were going to meet up with the party again, because like it felt like so realistic where sometimes people had a really good idea where they were like, yeah, we just need to keep heading on and Moraine will find us. And sometimes they had a really bad idea, like when Egwene and Perrin noped off to the wrong direction. Like those parts felt really nice, uh, really coherent to me, and I really liked those.
I would agree. Those felt like the most like I was reading a pretty typical epic fantasy of like you like plot that requires decision making is plot that gives you character development, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you show consequences to those actions, and that I think was done pretty well in those points. For my part, though, the most plot driven stuff that I liked was the stuff that drove the lore. Anything where we start learning about the patterns of the weaving of the wheel of time, the parts where we start learning about the connections to the one power and what gives people those connections and stuff, like those plot points that moved uh, the magic system more into full view, and the fact that we learned that magic isn't all just the good, like the Aes Sedai and the Dark One. There's things that fall in the middle, like the thing that was starting to possess Matt, right? Those plot points, like that part felt very like Aladdin and the the Cave of Wonders, you know. But like it was fun because it was like, oh shit, there's something else that lurks in the dark that we need to worry about. And then it led to the point of the split up itself. Like that split up itself I thought was very cool because it split up into people that forced other characters to learn a bit about themselves aside from Moiraine, which again is another issue that I have. And arguably Egwene doesn't learn a ton either. But
It
but even
prevented
that,
the characters from just being like, Moraine, do everything for
or
us.
fall, yeah, or falling into like a too much of a singular archetype. Like Nynaeve, we learn has like she does have soft spots and she does have motivations. Like I thought of the women, she was the best portrayed as having complexity to her, and those points are highlighted by actual plot points. Like we learn about her ability to, like, as much as it was very not subtle foreshadowing, we learned about her ability to connect to the wind and speak to the wind and connect to the one power through that specific time that she has with Lan and Moiraine. And she actually learns something from it. She learns that, like, she found her way to the group because of that connection, and she starts to understand bits about herself. And honestly, definitely ship her and Lan, like, hardcore, because they're two like but like those plot points where you have character development and lore development, those were the parts that I thought were done really well. But the problem is that I don't think that the author did the best job of weaving in world building into the plot. They seemed like two separate things, and when you lost the plot for the sake of world building, it could get a little boring.
Yeah. V.S. Drake ships Nynaeve and Lan very hard. Extremely hard if he's competing with Amazon. Those fuckers are out of control.
Agreed. V.S. Drake has that yesterday shipping on them. Precognitive shipping.
Let's get into final thoughts.
All right. So my final thoughts are, this is a very, very lore-heavy epic fantasy that I would only recommend to people who are really dedicated readers, because there's a lot to get through, but it just, there's so much potential there that you also have to be ready to read more if you really want to get the most out of this, I think. I think there are great elements that are really done well. Like there's some good plot, some great character development. There's amazing lore. There's an underlying magic system, which I absolutely want to know more about. There's, your typical epic fantasy battles on the horizon. There's some parts that get a bit tough to get through. But if you're a dedicated fantasy reader, I think there is enough good here that I would absolutely recommend it. How about you?
Yeah, I really liked the characters in the book. I love me a good plot, but it just wasn't there for me. Found it a little lacking. But the characters definitely more than made up for the lacking plot. I think Jordan has some work to do. Well, these are obviously all out already. Had some work to do from this point on to kind of backpedal from that boss fight at the end of the book, and kind of set the pace back on track. But I am very curious about learning more about the one power, or the one, whatever the fuck they call it.
Yeah.
I want to know where all the characters end up. I'm invested in these characters. Not all of them, but some of them, especially Rand and Perrin. I really want to know what the fuck they end up doing. I don't know what's with me when F-bombs tonight, but I gotta chill it out, man. I would recommend this book. Just take your time through it and understand that you're not going to have an exciting turn around every corner.
Yeah, I think I would recommend this to just about any person who plays D&D who knows that sometimes it just gets a little in the story.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I agree also with what VS Drake said, is that the cozy prose. The prose, I think, was probably the best thing in this overall. Is it allowed me to, when there were the points where there was character development, lore, world building, and all that, it allowed me to really sink into it. And if it weren't for the prose, I don't think this would be nearly the book that it is.
Yeah. I think in future books, I want to see more about the Aes Sedai, and the biggest factor I think is having characters do things instead of just wander around.
Yeah, yeah.
I would like to see more of a goal from characters other than get to point B.
Speaking from experience, not to spoil too much, but you do. Let's just say there's hope for this series yet. Having read a couple of those. All right. Yeah. Why don't we start wrapping it up then? Now that we have done our final thoughts. Looks like our book for July is People Who Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. And for
we don't go ahead.
Oh, and we are still tallying votes on the book for August, which was school themed, so back to school. Any books revolving around schools or educational. And for September, we have a theme that I think will be pretty interesting, and that's books you love to hate. So we are talking all books that people hate on for good or bad reasons, or it can be books that are so bad that they're good.
All right, let's talk amongst ourselves for a moment here.
Yeah, we sorry about this.
We're doing a Deadly Education by Naomi Novik is next for August, whatever date we decided for August.
Yeah, August 24th, 2024.
Thank you. August 24th.
So 8/24/24.
So July 2024 is People We Meet on Vacation, and August 24th, 24 is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik.
Right, and and we will have that list for you shortly. Luckily, because we're on the monthly schedule, we've got plenty of time, but we will have that list for you to vote on. Please, Adam, tell them how they can vote on those things.
All right, fine. Yeah, join us on our Patreon, and you'll get to vote. Did you read any side pieces?
Yeah, books 2 and 3 of the Wheel of Time series. I also finally finished up Rhythm of War, so I'm all caught up for the 2 of the 3 themes that will be coming for October and November. They will be heavily Brandon Sanderson themed for his upcoming book release. Keep that in mind, all you folks out there who are as big of fans as we are over here at the DM's table and the 800s. So I'm all caught up and ready to go on those. Also, I read... Oh, why am I blanking on the book? It was one that was recommended to me by my mom, and I don't remember honestly what it was named, because it was like an 8-hour book that I may or may not have read and need to revisit. But I don't remember it being bad. I need to bring up my Audible. Give me a second. Adam, you tell me about your side pieces.
I didn't have any. What? back to you. Just kidding. I definitely did not have any side pieces this time, though. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I transitioned jobs recently, and that unfortunately has sucked dry my free time due to extended hours as I train and am exhausted and don't feel like reading. But yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I get more family time, less alone time, more family time, so less book time. But
fair enough.
I will probably start back on the side pieces soon. I got to pick up. I'm on the 5th book of what's it called? That horny book series.
Oh, the Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yeah, Thorns and Roses. Yeah, Akotar. Yeah, I'm on the 5th book. I think it's the 5th book. The last. I'm on the last book. I'm like halfway through it. I'll get back to it soon. I haven't read it in like 3 months, but I'll get back to it soon. Yeah, so V.S. Drake did prequel book 2 and working on book 3 of Wheel of Time. That's exciting. I wish I could join you there. I really want to continue these characters' stories. I will get there eventually. Unfortunately, I am also planning a Stormlight reread in the very near future. So my time this year is probably all taken up with planned side pieces. But 2025, maybe 2025, I'll come back to Wheel of Time and get some more under my belt. Have you found your book, Alex? Have I meandered enough for you to find your book?
Oh yeah, I finally read. It was called The Whale Rider.
Ooh.
So it was pretty. It was a pretty good book for being. There's a movie out on it, I believe, and the novel is, I think, because I remember now seeing the movie. My mom recommended me the book because it gives some more in-depth explanations of like the perspective of the kid as opposed to just being a Free Willy remake, but in New Zealand. kind of, but not really. But I think it provides some good depth, so worth a read. That's The Whale Rider by hold on. Yeah, I believe it actually is on our list of books that we've had suggested before. Yeah. Yeah, it's The Whale Rider by Witi Ihimera. Anyways, those were my book side pieces, and I think with that, I hope you guys have had fun reading and joining us this month on the 800s. We're looking forward to seeing you in July, so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next book.
Thanks, guys. It was fun tonight. See you in a month.